Asylums were mostly built a century ago. They were placed in the countryside, away from towns. Through ignorance and fear, society thought it necessary to keep the mentally disordered as far as possible from the community. Treatment then was purely custodial. Once inside the walls, you stayed there. Concentrating together those who had the most difficulty in communicating with others and depriving them of a normal social life was catastrophic. Stripping the sick of individuality, enforcing regimentation and idleness, added an illness, institutional neurosis. Today, the old attitudes have gone. From about 15 years ago, the success of new treatment gave hospital doctors the courage to throw keys away. The good results of this open-door policy showed that what had passed for madness was the product not purely of psychiatric illness, but also of the prison-like conditions. But if changes in the social surroundings within hospitals are so vital, so are the attitudes of the community if we're positively to help the mentally ill in the world outside.
A very long time. I was 23 years in hospital. Oft times I seem to revolt, want to come out.
Sometimes I don't tell them that I've been in the mental hospital, you know. But I think they understand if you do tell them, you know.
The outside world, to us in here, especially to the patients, is more or less a mad world, you see, as regards, you know.
Nothing to worry about now at all, you hear me? Not a thing to worry about. You hear me now? Right, are you coming now then? The car is outside.
Handbag, John, please. Handbag, please.
Yes. Are you ready now?
Yes, there's the handbag in the
It's in the hall.
All right.
The case and the handbag is in the hall. Are you right? Come on now, you'll be all right when you go there now to the hospital. Come on. Won't you?
Mrs. Mary Roberts, suffering from neurotic depression, on her way to hospital.
I'll get the case for you now.
A general practitioner.
I think all of us have some degree of mental illness in the same way as you could look at it from the other point of view and say that there is no mental illness which is not to some extent an exaggeration of normality.
In one family in 5, one of the members will suffer a disabling psychiatric illness in his or her lifetime. One woman in every 9, one man in every 14 will enter a psychiatric hospital before they die. Today and tomorrow, 750,000 people are receiving psychiatric treatment of some kind from their GP, local mental welfare department, or a hospital.
Most of us, at some time or another, exhibit some of the symptoms of mental illness. We're all depressed from time to time. We're all elated from time to time. We all of us have feelings of mild persecution. We all of us have feelings of some kind of euphoria. I dare say many of us have made a false association of ideas. Some parts of our mental systems have broken down. It's a question of degree, really, isn't it?
And the thing is that you couldn't go to a better place than where you're going, really, you know.
Yes.
It's a fine hospital, isn't it?
In the past, the majority of patients had to be certified as insane by magistrates and were taken compulsorily to hospital. Now, nearly all who need psychiatric treatment are admitted voluntarily in exactly the same way as you go into a medical or surgical ward.
Is this Mrs. Roberts, is it? Yes, please do. Yes, you can come in, I'll take it.
At one time, Mrs. Roberts would never have considered going into a mental hospital. She'd have stayed at home and put up with her depression. Now she accepts treatment willingly in the psychiatric department of local general hospitals like this. The number of patients going into psychiatric hospitals has more than doubled in the last 15 years. This doesn't mean that psychiatric illness is increasing, but reflects a change in attitude. Whereas admission to a mental hospital was justifiably regarded as a life sentence and to be avoided at all costs, now people realise that they'll almost certainly be out again in a comparatively short time.
I was very depressed, and I was having delusions about my work. I was thinking that people were spying on me and checking up on me, and that perhaps I was making mistakes.
And so I said, well, either you agreed to have the doctor, or I'll ring him up. And then he did get on to the doctor himself, and the doctor arranged for the psychiatrist to see him.
First of all, they gave me drugs to calm me down, and then I was given electroconvulsive treatment. I was taken into the theatre where I was given an anaesthetic, and I was not conscious at all of the treatment. All I remember was when I woke up feeling absolutely at peace with the world. Even after the first treatment, I felt more or less normal again.
No one knows why physical treatments are so effective, but for certain types of severe depression, electrical therapy has saved tens of thousands of patients from suicide or from prolonged despair. And electrical treatment and the new drugs mean psychiatrists can treat people as outpatients at centres where they can go for care and treatment during the day while still living at home. A consultant psychiatrist at a general hospital.
One of the most important recent advances has been in the long-term care of schizophrenia. At present, it's necessary for practically all cases of schizophrenia to remain on drugs for long periods, because although not every case requires this kind of medication, it's impossible really to predict in advance which ones need it and which ones don't. And therefore, as a precaution, one has to keep most cases of schizophrenia on long-term medication. Now, in the past, getting people to take tablets for long periods has proved to be very unreliable. But we now have a long-acting form of drug which is given by injection and which need only be given once a month.
Mrs. Mary Savage is one of the many patients who benefit from this new treatment. She had a severe psychiatric illness following the birth of her first child. She recovered from this illness. Then she had another child and again became seriously ill. It was a form of schizophrenia that afflicts a number of women after childbirth. Her husband, Peter.
On some days that I've gone to work, I've come home, the kids have been in the pyjamas, you know, and you don't know whether they've been fed. And, you say to Mary, you know, what's happened here? You say, well, they were crying and they got on my nerves, which, at first, you're angry and you don't want to see this. Well, I didn't want to know it was happening.
The acute stages of psychiatric illness can be too much for families to deal with, but the residual illness and convalescence is becoming a more acceptable and accepted responsibility. Mary Savage was treated in a general hospital and her baby stayed with her throughout her 8-week spell in the hospital. Now she comes regularly once a month to the outpatient clinic for her injection of a long-acting drug. These drugs control the more distressing symptoms of schizophrenia and other illnesses. Such relief is clearly a great help to the patient. It doesn't, alas, guarantee a complete cure. But Mary does live a comparatively normal life at home. And it's not only her that benefits. Because she's out of hospital, there's no split in the family. She can be a mother to her children.
The people and the staff at the hospital, they seem to take a enormous amount of interest in making sure that she was always happy and making sure that she wasn't out of place. And, they tried to keep her in touch with her baby as much as they possibly could. The hospital was good because it was so handy. You know, it was only a 5 minutes walk to it.
Mary Savage represents thousands who might otherwise be spending long periods in psychiatric hospitals. A useful step, but not the complete answer. For those who still need hospital care, there are a number of good reasons for basing their treatment on a general hospital. Unlike the remote asylum, it's usually a hospital that people know. They may have been there to have their babies. Relatives can visit easily, an important aid to recovery and discharge. But there are only enough places in general hospitals for one psychiatric patient out of every 7.
Well, now, I think we'll perhaps reassess and review the case of Lynn next. We've done a certain amount of psychotherapy with her.
Lynn came into hospital 10 weeks ago with a very severe depression.
Of course, I need hardly add, gave her a few electrical treatments initially. Well, perhaps you could bring her in there, so we'll just have a look at her now.
I've not really started any psychotherapy yet. The first time I saw her, she wasn't accessible.
Yeah. Hello, Lynn. Do sit down. Well, how are you feeling now?
Much better, I think.
Much better, I see. In what way?
Well, I'm glad to be alive. I'm not as depressed.
Good, good. Well, that's something, isn't it, in your case? Because you certainly did have morbid thoughts and so on originally. And the fact that you're able to say that in your case is very real progress. What do you think gave rise to all this in the first instance? What's your own interpretation of the situation?
I don't really know. I think I just got depressed, and I think depression, I don't know what constitutes depression really. I think it was a lot of things.
What things?
Well, leaving training college to go into the wide and wonderful world, and when I got there it was a bit too wide and not quite so wonderful.
All the people who are involved in Lynn's treatment are brought together to get to know her case history. One wonders how disturbing it is to the patient.
How do you find her in occupational therapy?
She's socialising much more with everybody in the department now.
She is?
Yes, and she's got more confidence in herself. When she's talking to you, she'll look you in the face, you know, she wouldn't do it one time.
I see.
If she gets stuck with anything, she'll come and ask you. She wouldn't do that before.
Would you agree with this, Lynn? You heard what the occupational therapist said.
Yeah.
Good.
How do you find things since you've been here in the hospital? Let's have your own reactions.
The feelings towards it varied according to what mood I was in.
Yes.
If I felt depressed, then I felt it wasn't doing me any good. I was wasting my time here.
Yes.
And wasting everybody else's time.
The great danger of these units in general hospitals is that they may become ivory towers, admitting only the easier patients. Then the success rates of the mental hospitals would go down, as they were left with the more difficult patients, resembling again the Victorian asylums. So far, this hasn't happened. A consultant psychiatrist at Glenside Psychiatric Hospital.
We find that the vast majority of new patients who come in fact, are discharged reasonably quickly. I think the average length of time in this hospital, somewhere around 3 to 4 weeks at the present time. There is, of course, a readmission rate, which is quite high, and sometimes with readmission, with each subsequent readmission, the patient tends to remain in hospital for a longer period of time.
In a recent survey of the patient population at Glenside, it was found that of the 12,000 admissions over the past 4 years, 178 had remained for over a year. While this seems a small number in itself, it becomes more significant when added to the accumulation of patients from the past 30 or 40 years. while the majority of new patients can be treated, the problem of the patient hospitalised for a long time is still with us and is going to be with us for the foreseeable future.
Hospitals, of course, are very much more pleasant places to live for the long-stay patients than they used to be, and I'm very glad that it's so. But it still doesn't seem to be quite the right place for patients to spend their lives, living in dormitories of 20, 30, 40 people. I would prefer to see domestic arrangements made on hospital or on other sites for such patients who need continuing permissiveness rather than living in the open society. By that I mean who continue to be eccentric. I don't think that we should ask the community to accept eccentricity beyond a certain level, and I don't think that the patients want to live in the community when they are eccentric beyond this level.
Of 1,000 long-stay patients in the hospital, around 1/3 have only mild psychiatric symptoms and aren't regarded by the medical staff as needing inpatient care. But they can't be discharged because they've become unable to lead an independent life. They may be too old, or have no friends or homes to go to, or as a result of the kind of apathy forced upon them by the institution, they may be unable to create a new life for themselves outside the hospital. To the layman, one of the least recognised aspects of psychiatric illness is the loss of self-confidence and a sense of personal failure, which may remain for years after the acute stages of the illness have died away.
But to go outside and settle down in a place of your own or sharing it with somebody else, you've got them more or less an anxiety about it, whether you will fit in. That's the old complaint creeping in, and you've got to drive it out, you see, and reassert yourself.
Leaving aside the aged population, which is a growing population, the long-stay psychiatric patients, for example, there are about 46,000 schizophrenics under the age of 60 in the psychiatric hospitals of England and Wales, and this is a major problem. This is out of a total of probably 130 to 135,000 beds, and the problem of getting the majority of these, or we won't get a majority of them, getting as many as possible of these out into the community after long periods of time in hospital, maybe 5 to 30 years. This is one of the major problems at the present time.
Even the simplest thing, like shopping, is difficult for someone who's been in hospital for a long time. He needs help. The old-fashioned ill-fitting clothes and his lack of money mark him as different, but these are easily altered.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
I have some gentlemen here that I want a little bit of your help
Yes,
from
yes.
you. We are from the hospital, and 3 gentlemen, we're going to buy some clothes.
I see, yeah.
Now, I would like your help in trousers.
Trousers, yes.
Yes. Have you got washable trousers, Terylene?
Terylene, yes. Terylene we do have washable trousers, yes.
So that would be trousers.
Trousers, yeah.
And a sports jacket.
Sports jacket. Which
These 2 gentlemen I want.
Can we
these
try a
off.
sports jacket on for him then?
Yes, by all
Can you just
means.
start me off with your clothes, sir? I'll get the jacket for him. Right.
Vincent Crane has been a patient in a general hospital psychiatric unit for 10 years, where most patients only remain a few weeks. His severe schizophrenic illness is now burning itself out. It won't be long before he'll be going home.
Yeah, have a look at yourself. That's it. How's that one?
All right, thank you.
Like to go try the other one on as well?
Patients whose symptoms are controlled can very often live in the community rather than live in hospital for the rest of their lives, and it's this conception that has led to the biggest change in hospital administration in the last decade. It isn't really very much use people living in the community if they're not part of the community or if the community rejects them. And in order to be part of the community, a person must contribute to that community. This is why, as far as the long-stay patients are concerned, we have emphasized the necessity for patients being self-supporting.
Glenside has set up its own factory in the local industrial centre to help with rehabilitation of the patients. It's called the Industrial Therapy Organisation. The aim is to prepare people for industry, not to provide permanent employment.
I think patients who require a permissive atmosphere in which to live, if they're not prepared to go into the open community, if they haven't been, in fact, trained to go back into the open community, it can, under certain circumstances, be deleterious to them and harmful to them to discharge them to the community.
That's why I say you get plenty of bus trips like we're getting now, aren't we? So yeah. Makes a difference.
This factory is astonishingly one of only 2 industrial therapy organisations in the entire country that's situated within the community and away from the hospital. This is the first chance that many people have had to get back to work after 20 or 30 years in hospital wards. 120 people come to this workshop of the Industrial Therapy Organisation. Between them, they've spent nearly 4,000 years in hospital. Even simple and repetitive jobs bring the patient the dignity of a weekly wage packet. They need some supervision. The manager is an ex-psychiatric nurse.
Oh, very nice, sir. Can you cope with it all right?
Yes, sir.
And since you've been down in industry, what do you think about it in ITO?
Well, it does you good, so it helps you get well.
You're quite happy about all your circumstances and
yes,
conditions?
Yes, sir. Quite all right.
And when are you thinking of leaving hospital?
Well, I don't know. Well, the doctor said that they're going to put me in one of the houses, sir.
Long-stay patients can't go straight into full-time employment. It does take time to re-establish the habit of normal work. It isn't always easy for an ex-patient to get a full-time job. No industrialist looking for employees ever contacted the hospital itself, but many contact the Industrial Therapy Organisation. Managers are much more attracted to the idea of going into a factory quite away from the hospital to find potential employees. This factory has been going for 10 years, and 450 men and women have left to take full-time jobs. But few of them would have made it unaided. The problem over the whole country is only going to be solved if the approach of this voluntary organisation is taken up by local authorities or one of the ministries. There's one further step that people can take before moving into full-time employment. That's to work in sheltered groups in factories in the outside community. This group has worked here for 5 years, sorting and shredding tobacco in a cigarette factory. Before that, some of them had spent up to 31 years in the hospital. There are thousands more who could benefit from this sort of opportunity, but have to remain idle. A nursing supervisor is present all the time, mainly to make sure that everyone takes their daily medicine. There have been no other problems. Side by side with the industrial therapy is a halfway house between hospital and home, so that these people may return from work to an ordinary address. The Vale Hotel is unique, yet there's no reason why similar accommodation shouldn't be available all over the country. It's run by Mrs. Guppy, at one time a sister at Glenside.
The residents pay their rent every week, and of course it's entirely supported by the rents paid by the residents. And they have their own rent books, their own latchkeys. The rules are more or less like hotels. And they have, well, there are no rigid rules, just as though they were living in a hotel.
How did you like being filmed? Was it very nice? Was it? You did it all right?
Oh, the most rewarding aspect is seeing them develop and, well, they're accepted into society and they accept society. You've got to think of that part of it too. And, well, generally the way that they are living just as a normal person would. They've made friends round about. They've been accepted at any social functions. And, well, they're generally accepted as someone living in a hotel.
The ultimate goal is independent living and self-support. After 23 years in a mental hospital, Andrew Quinlan has progressed through hostel and 2 years without work to a steady job in a mill and his own digs.
The person is very strange. I was in a quandary, as you might say, and I didn't know where to go, you know. I couldn't make up my mind what to do. Well, I cook my own food, and I do my shopping. I'm on my own at my job. I'm my own boss in a way, you know, to a certain extent. I happen to have a wireless, a transistor set. I managed to get that from my foreman, my last job, 2 years ago. He sold it me cheaply, and of course, I jumped at the bargain. I spent many a pleasant evening listening to my wireless.
Hospital had at least offered Andrew Quinlan a degree of companionship. Now he's very much alone. But considering the setbacks, his is a quite remarkable achievement. For many, what he's done isn't feasible. A day centre like Cleveland House in Salford provides essential support, without which many ex-patients would inevitably find their way back into hospital.
Here we just have the same things, our dinner, and we look after us, and we do our best for them.
I'm lonely at home. I live in a flat on my own. They don't ill-treat you and knock you about here, and all your friends are very kind to you here, and the staff and your friends try to help you to get better, and they don't in hospital.
You're here and you're with company, aren't you? With company here.
Just live on my own, that's the reason I come. Because I've nobody to come near me. I haven't any visitors or relations or anything. Just me by myself. Come for company.
Oh, wait a minute.
The latest that.
No, what's that one we used to sing?
The 1959 Mental Health Act made it obligatory for the local authorities to set up services like this. It's 10 years since that act, and still 3/4 of them have done nothing. This simple therapy has been very successful for the middle-aged and old. But young people need something different.
With the people at the labour exchange so that we can do that. What about you? What about relations with your parents?
I just don't bother, stay away, you know.
You stay away.
In the same house, a psychiatric day centre for adolescents, with a social worker and a psychiatrist.
When you're trying to demonstrate this sort of behaviour disturbance, then you can easily give the impression that you're just dealing with a bunch of lazy layabouts or sort of extension of Butlins, and in fact you're not. In fact, these people have been very severely distressed, or have had a major mental illness, or have nearly died by their own hand within the last few months.
The Cleveland Club is the only unit of its kind for a surrounding population of over 4 million. It's one of the very few examples of a last-ditch attempt to cure psychiatric illness before adulthood. George Mountney, a mental welfare officer.
Part of the problems are problems of development. It may be that in 10 years' time they'll settle down. But at this particular point of time, when they're in some kind of crisis, taking them into hospital in a formal hospital setting may not play a very important part in helping them. And the sort of place that we've had a look at here, where we have a very relaxed, informal approach, the fact that we've got this kind of place adds something to the quite useful facility that we have at the hospital. I think, again, the two things together add up to quite a reasonable way of dealing with young people.
Anyway, it wasn't. Was it worse than you
The only time I
expected?
could...
Did they wash your stomach out?
Yeah. I
Right
can't
away?
remember that properly.
No.
I can't remember what happened. I didn't know until Shirley told me.
Were you very upset just before it happened? Why did you do it?
I was so fed up and everything. We were supposed to...
Did anything go wrong at home? Was there a row or anything
Well,
like that?
I was staying out one night, you see.
The social worker is an essential member of the team from the beginning to the end of our intervention in any particular case or with any particular family. It isn't simply a question of obtaining information for us, but in many cases the social worker actually provides a form of psychotherapy or psychological support. And in many cases they provide long-term support for patients who may have had a spell of treatment in hospital.
Mary Savage has the full support of her family. Nevertheless, she too needs the safety net of social worker visits.
In the afternoon as early as I could, and come up to my mother-in-law's.
What about it from the point of view of looking after Lisa? Because
Well,
she'd been here all the time.
Yeah, I found that very difficult, really, getting her used to me being her mother again, because she started calling me mother-in-law mother, and, it was like starting all over again with her.
Yeah. Did you find it a bit hurtful when she'd run to your mother-in-law instead of coming to you?
Yeah, I did in a way.
When she's turned away and come to me, I've seen the mother's face drop and the change come over, and I thought, no, I'll just keep sending Lisa to her. And in the end, you see, the child began to climb on the knee, put her arms around her neck, and the mother's face, the smiles on it, and I thought, I'm on the right tracks, I'm doing it the right way.
In focusing on the hospital and community services and on the professionals involved, it's so easy to lose sight of the really important people in the picture, and that is the immediate relatives. These are the people that really carry the burden, and these services must be structured in a way to give them the support so that they can do the real job. Because although, it's suggested that many problems arise from families, and this is true, but it's also true that the family is an integral part of support for anyone. Everybody needs the family, and as I say, the services should be geared to supporting and buttressing the help that they undoubtedly, for the most part anyway, want to give to the patient, the relative.
Put your face to me. Put it back.
It's no good having lavish hospitals and all the physical means of treatment and so forth if after you've given what you can of your treatment, you discharge the person who is going to be better but not cured probably. If you discharge them and there's no one to take care of them, there's no one to perhaps play a part in their rehabilitation before they're really ready to take their part in society.
A survey of the Salvation Army hostels shows that a large proportion of the men and women in them have serious psychiatric illnesses, at least 15% schizophrenic, 8% depressive, and a further 50% with personality disorders. There are over 3,000 people like this in our cities at any one time. They're a minority, but their lives are a tragic succession of rootless wanderings, from mental hospital to reception centre, from prison to doss house. Many of them are in this state as a direct result of discharge from hospital without any form of medical support.
I think that one of our problems today is that we do have these potent drugs which give us the illusion of having solved a problem. A patient comes to us who is anxious because of a lack of inner security, anxious because perhaps society is not providing the answers that society ought to provide as a whole. We know perfectly well that we have within our powers the handing out of tablets. We know all of us that we have the power to hand out a tablet which will mask the disease. And the temptation is very great to use it.
10 years ago, nobody doubted that the use of new drugs and building up services in the community was the beginning of a revolution in the treatment of the mentally ill. But, in a rather traditional British way, community care was left to the initiative of the local councils. It won't be until 1974 that 7 out of the 174 local authorities will have reached the minimum in mental health services laid down by the Department of Health. Although hospitals have become so much more successful in the treatment of acute illnesses, society still fails to provide care and support outside for those who are handicapped or old or who lack the help of relatives. The old, in particular, are a test of society's concern. As more and more people live on into old age, many of them will inevitably present us with a psychiatric problem. The long-stay patient of the old-style asylum is reappearing in a new form, the geriatric. They suffer from hardening of the arteries of the brain, reducing its blood supply, or from the actual degeneration of the brain due to aging. Then, problems such as confusion, wandering, incontinence create difficulties that the community isn't prepared to put up with. Because society has failed to make proper facilities available for them, more and more old people tend to be sent to large mental hospitals, which is neither what they want nor what they really need. A consultant psychiatrist at a general hospital.
If, for the sake of argument, mental hospitals didn't exist in the first place, I'm perfectly sure that no one would come up with the idea that an institution such as a mental hospital should be built in order to deal with an aging population. And this way of putting the thing gives, in my view, the lie to the total problem. In other words, I think that the problem of an aging population is essentially a sociological problem, and at rock bottom, society must decide how it wishes to deal with its old folk. When the local authority is working out their statistics, they won't have a true record of the actual situation, simply because many of the people for whom they should be making provision are being admitted to a mental hospital. Now, this is one example of many others, one could give many more, whereby in the long run, in my view, progress is actually retarded by doing the thing in this way.
It's the great advances in treatment, both medical and social, of the mentally ill, that have made us aware of how much can be done and what remains to be done. The paradox is that in a situation where resources are scarce, by hospitalizing the mentally ill, we are choosing the most expensive and the least satisfactory alternative.
I would like to see the disappearance of the mental hospitals, provided they disappeared. not to be used as peripheral hospitals and to be used as receptacles for aged people, for chronic psychotics, for subnormals, and for social flotsam and jetsam and disagreeable patients of various kinds, which in my opinion would convert the old psychiatric hospitals into a workhouse.
But on a national scale, there cannot really be any very great step forward until there is a complete change in the way that money is spent for mental health services. At present, the proportion is roughly £130 million a year being spent on institutions for the mentally ill and the mentally subnormal, whereas about 25 million is spent on community services. I would suggest that one would have to reverse this kind of proportion to be able to make any real progress towards creating comprehensive community services outside hospitals. But to do this, there would have to be a very major change of national policy, and the National Health Service would have to commit itself to running down and closing down the overwhelming proportion of the existing institutions for mental illness and mental subnormality.